Welcome to another edition of This Guy, the show where we pick one guy who's making America worse and explain why they suck. I'm Erin Ryan, host of Crooked Media's Hysteria podcast.
And I'm Alyssa Mastromonaco, the other host of Crooked Media's Hysteria podcast. And today we're talking about a man who will always be remembered as the liver spot that turned out to be the malignant melanoma on the face of Western democracy.
A man as beautiful on the outside as he is on the inside. The big, evil media grandpappy himself, Rupert Murdoch. He's like if the Attic portrait of Dorian Gray came alive and became filthy rich by convincing the lowest common denominator around the world that immigrants were the problem.
Rupert Murdoch is the man credited with sullying Western media into the slop trough it is today. However, if I may say something nice about him...
Oh, really?
Erin, without Murdoch's metastatic greed and unpleasantness, we would not have the show Succession, which I have watched in its entirety 8 to 10 times. Always remember, Erin, you can't make a Tomlet without breaking a few Gregs.
All right, fair enough. So for better or for worse, it's high time we put this ancient Australian under the microscope. Like we're scientists examining a cell sample from the rat that gave the first human the bubonic plague. Okay, Keith Rupert Murdoch was born on March 11th, 1931. Happy belated, by the way, in Melbourne, Victoria, Australia. He's 94 years old. As they say, only the good die young.
Wait, Keith?
Yes. Rupert Murdoch's real first name is Keith, which is funny because by his own media outlet's logic, we should all insist on calling him by the name assigned to him at birth. His father, Keith Sr., was a former World War I war correspondent turned small-time news magnate, owning 2 regional newspapers in Adelaide, Australia, as well as a radio station. This was back when radio announcers talked like this. The immigrants are at it again.
Young Rupert grew up doing whatever young Australian boys did in the 1930s, like clubbing water rats to death and selling their pelts, collecting and selling rabbit manure, screwing his younger sister out of profits from his family's shit and skin business. All of this is 100% true, by the way. Unsurprisingly, Rupert was relentlessly bullied at school.
Can't imagine why, but, once again, the bullies were right.
But he showed them, eventually making his way to the United Kingdom to study philosophy, politics, and economics at Oxford University.
At Oxford, Rupert was a bona fide young leftist and even had a bust of Vladimir Lenin in his room. It even garnered him the nickname Red Rupert.
Okay, go off, Comrade Keith.
In 1952, when Rupert was 21, his father died suddenly, so Rupert finished his degree and returned to Australia to take control of his father's business. He inherited the News of Adelaide, a newspaper in southern Australia with a circulation of about 75,000. Fun fact, Adelaide is also known for producing a high number of serial killers.
Okay, in 2008, his biographer Michael Wolff would describe him as having few friends and virtually no hobbies, which means that he's had gobs of time to devote to being the absolute worst. Over the next decade, the young Murdoch began expanding his national reach to control more of the news share, buying the Sunday Times in Perth and Sydney's The Daily Mirror. Then he founded a national newspaper called The Australian in 1964.
Each of Murdoch's newspapers became known for his proprietary mix of sports, scandal, sex, and populist outrage. He's often credited, or scorned, as the inventor of the modern tabloid, which is sort of like being proud of being the first person to give a koala chlamydia. But Australia's relatively small population meant that Rupert's ambition for news domination had a natural ceiling, unless he expanded internationally. So in 1969, the United States went to the moon, and Rupert went to the UK to buy some more newspapers. He acquired 2 English newspapers, News of the World and The Sun.
Just as he had down under, Rupert kind of brought both of these papers down a few notches to the tabloid level, and as a result, they became massively profitable. During this time, he made some enemies by screwing people over, most notably established media mogul Robert Maxwell. Robert Maxwell is now best known for being the father of Ghislaine Maxwell, who is best known for being accused of being a prolific sex trafficking accomplice.
It all goes back to Epstein, man. After acquiring The Sun, Rupert told the new editor he had appointed, quote, "I want a tearaway paper with lots of tits in it." Oh, God. It says I have to try this in an Australian accent. Oh. I want a tearaway paper with lots of tits in it.
And
I'm never doing that again. Julia!
And put tits in the newspaper? He did. Murdoch is credited with innovating the concept of the page 3 girl, which is just a naked lady who appears on page 3 of the newspaper.
That Oxford education hard at work. See, putting nips in the newspaper is much more a Keith move to me than it is a Rupert move.
Rupert, to me, is the name of a person who gets gout at a young age. Keith is the boobs guy.
Oh, absolutely. Keith is definitely the boobs guy. When he wasn't just slanging middle-class tits, Rupert used his British newspapers to successfully campaign for conservative mommy and anti-union girl boss Margaret Thatcher, who in turn later cleared a regulatory path for him to expand his British TV holdings, a move he would later duplicate in the United States. But we'll get to that later.
Murdoch clearly already had an eye toward world domination, or at least news domination, when he expanded into the American market in 1973.
I mean, he acquired 2 local newspapers in San Antonio, Texas. Not exactly a splash, but just 3 years later, he entered the American big leagues of newspapers when he acquired the New York Post in 1976. Yes, there was no better way to ring in America's 200th birthday than to buy the legendary rag that would one day give us such iconic headlines as Headless Body in a Topless Bar. There is also Cloak and Shag Her. CIA boss Petraeus quits over affair. That's really good. Tiger pulls out, tosses clubs in bid to save his marriage. And about 1,000 wiener puns during the many, many Anthony Weiner sex scandals. I was in New York for those, and it was not great. But my favorite New York Post cover headline was, Cuomo beats Weiner, then goes limp. Okay,
Erin!
Sorry. I respect the New York Post's essential headline journalism.
Most people don't know that before Murdoch acquired it, the Post was a seriously lefty newspaper. In the 1950s, it was known for muckraking journalism, targeting red-baiting demagogue Senator Joseph McCarthy and infamous urban developer Robert Moses. Some people even derisively referred to it as that pinko paper. But once Rupert came to town, all that was over, as the New York Post would headline it, From Pinko to Stinko.
Being the puppet master at the Post naturally thrust Murdoch into the world of ultra-rich New York City conservatives. And like all super wealthy, unapologetic, tri-state area slimebags, Rupert sought and retained legal representation from the infamous, mafia-connected, win-at-all-costs fixer Roy Cohn. You might know where this is going, she says, standing in front of a bulletin board, chaotically connecting disparate parts like rust coal from season 1 of True Detective.
At the time, Cohn was also representing a youngish, up-and-coming daddy's boy slumlord named Donald Trump, whom he introduced to Murdoch. You know, the more I think about Rupert Murdoch, the more I think that he's the kind of businessman Donald Trump would be if Trump had a higher than room temperature IQ and the smallest motivation to learn new things.
That's true. Roy Cohn is a fascinating, sinister character in his own right who seems to show up everywhere in the history of modern American fucking guys. We don't really have time to get into his whole deal right now, but he's important to mention because Trump, Cohn, and Murdoch all share a seemingly lifelong commitment to the unilateral pursuit of power as a tool of influence and personal enrichment that doesn't strictly adhere to any one ideology. And like the guys he helped summon from the depths into the upper echelons of power, he seems like a terrible hang.
He's also important in Murdoch's story because Cohn was instrumental in the New York Post's rightward shift, worked on Ronald Reagan's 1980 presidential campaign, and introduced Murdoch to Reagan's entire inner circle, including the head of New York State campaign operations, Roger Stone.
Alyssa, sorry to interrupt this, but bingo! I just got fucking guy bingo. Roy Cohn, Donald Trump, free space, Ronald Reagan, Roger Stone. Bingo. Every time I hear Roger Stone's name, I imagine a cross between the Riddler and the guy in those J.G. Wentworth commercials who screams, "It's my money, and I need it now!"
It's my money, and I need it now!
In any event, Stone guided Murdoch to weaponize the New York Post in Reagan's favor. Reagan carried the Empire State that November, and his team credited Murdoch for the victory.
In 1981, Murdoch acquired the Times and the Sunday Times in Britain, conspicuously bypassing the country's anti-monopoly regulations thanks to buddy Margaret Thatcher, known also by her nickname, the Iron.
Don't DM us over this. We are prepared. We don't care. We know. We don't care. She is the Iron. And with Roy Cohn personally lobbying President Reagan to advance Murdoch's agenda, Murdoch was able to expand his newspaper and television holdings in the United States without antitrust intervention.
In 1985, Murdoch acquired the film production and distribution company 20th Century Fox, a deal so big it forced him to renounce his Australian citizenship because it's not legal for non-citizens to own TV networks. The following year, he launched the broadcast network, also named Fox, after the role he would play in the henhouse of American politics, we assume.
Fox quickly launched some, we hate to say it, truly incredible TV shows like The Simpsons, The X-Files, In Living Color, and Married with Children, in addition to brain-rotting network slop like Cops. Murdoch was always driven by the sneering anti-elite ethos that drives other rich hypocrites. You know the type. The ones who were never embraced by the other elites, and so they make it their life's mission to get revenge on the people who would not have them at their parties.
You mean Ivy League assholes like J.D. Vance, Josh Hawley, Ted Cruz, and Donald Trump, who pretend they're on the side of the common man when, in fact, if they ever hosted a common man in their home, they'd immediately have the furniture fumigated? Mm-hmm. He tried to produce content that regular old Real Joe and Jane Applebee's would like to watch or read or look at. The next few years were marked by Murdoch furthering his insatiable need to gobble up as much of the media pie for his empire, now called News Corp, as he could, bringing him to the brink of bankruptcy in the early 1990s. It also led him to chase down fellow media mogul Ted Turner in 1992.
Turner was the founder of CNN, America's first 24-hour news network, and Murdoch wanted it for himself. But Turner wouldn't sell, inciting Murdoch's decades-long obsession with CNN.
By 1994, Murdoch had struck a deal that made News Corp the largest operator of local television stations in the United States.
First up tonight on Local News 9, Milk Lemonade around the corner fudge is made and stolen. A downtown See's Candies was the site of a brazen armed robbery by a nude man last night, leaving would-be patrons with an eye full of nuts to go with their candies full of nuts.
In 1996, spurned by his white whale CNN, Murdoch launched CNN's Wario, Fox News. By this time, Murdoch not only owned the New York Post, 20th Century Fox, and most of America's local television stations, but also the Boston Herald, the Chicago Sun-Times, and publishing giant HarperCollins. These right-wing ghouls even came for our damn books. In his book, The Loudest Voice in the Room, journalist Gabriel Sherman writes that by the time Fox News premiered, what Murdoch had created at News Corp was not merely a company, but a kingdom, a virtual state unto itself. He tapped longtime GOP operative and professional creep Roger Ailes to be Fox News' first CEO.
Oh, Roger Ailes, the Walter Cronkite of Harvey Weinstein's. Ailes and Murdoch set off on whatever the opposite of a joint sleigh is, and Fox News debuted with 17 million subscribers. It quickly became Murdoch's most profitable asset, the hairiest mole on the puckered old man ass of his empire. By 2010, not even 15 years after its debut, 1 in 4 Americans said they got their news from Fox.
Murdoch had finally created a freaky multimedia octopus to promote his political allies and punish his adversaries. Comrade Keith would be so disappointed.
Murdoch gave Roger Ailes total creative control of Fox News, despite their slight ideological differences. In the coming decades, Murdoch would defend Ailes absolutely, even eventually siding with him over his own son when it came to editorial decisions.
Somehow watching Logan Roy being a complete shithead to his own children is entertaining.
I am surrounded by snakes and fucking morons!
But reading about how Keith Rupert Murdoch treated his own children is significantly less funny.
I want to say this to all the dads out there. You might not be the greatest father in the world, but as long as Rupert Murdoch draws breath, you are not the worst. But more on that later. Murdoch was such a simp for Roger Ailes that he even sided with Ailes over himself when it came to editorial decisions. In 2008, for example, Murdoch contemplated endorsing Barack Obama in the New York Post.
That might be surprising to you considering Murdoch's whole deal, but more than anything, he likes to align himself with whoever is winning. It helps the loser fans of his media properties feel important by association. He did the same thing in the UK, moving from backing conservatives in the Thatcher era to Labour leader Tony Blair in the 1990s, then back to conservatives.
In any case, Roger Ailes got wind of a possible Obama endorsement and freaked the fuck out, threatening to quit Fox. A few months later, the Post endorsed John McCain.
It makes sense that Murdoch wanted to keep Ailes, the architect of his most profitable asset, happy. As any American with a vaguely senile relative aged 50 to 100 knows all too well, Fox News is to scared old people what Adderall is to pre-law students during finals week.
Can't get enough of it. Some of it's illegal. Meth might be mixed in.
Give me more.
Yes. The National Bureau of Economic Research published a study in 2006 called The Fox News Effect, showing that the network's programming convinced between 3 and 8% of its audience to begin shifting their voting patterns towards the Republican Party.
3 to 8% may not sound like a lot, but when we're talking about tens of millions of viewers and the network where 1/4 of Americans are getting their news, those are the kinds of percentages that can easily swing elections. And they did.
The study's authors estimated that in the 2000 election, for example, the Fox effect may have produced some 10,000 additional votes in Florida for George W. Bush. Bush ended up winning Florida by fewer than 600 votes.
537 votes to be exact. Good thing Florida didn't end up being important in that election.
Ugh, I can't even think about that. It makes me hurt too bad. Following that NBER study, the Washington Post and Stanford did a little experiment to determine just how far the Fox News worms had dug into Americans' brains after just a decade on air. The experiment found that by the early 2000s, Republicans preferred to get all their news from Fox, even when it came to news that had nothing to do with politics, like sports, travel, and entertainment. This distinguished them from Democrats who didn't have a strong preference for where they got their non-political news.
This makes sense if you have even the basest understanding of what Fox News does. Of course, Republicans only wanted to get their news from Fox. Fox had been telling its audience for years that it was the only trustworthy source, repeatedly saying, every other network, every other newspaper is lying to you, was, if nothing else, effective in creating extremely loyal adherents.
Or, a cult. This all seems kind of quaint now in the age of hyper-partisan TikTok news influencers who tell you exactly what the algorithm wants you to hear. But the idea that people would avoid news sources they viewed as unfriendly to their existing biases while seeking out ones that were more compatible hadn't been this stark before.
Whatever partisan differences existed between newspapers and broadcast news channels, there was still an undergirding principle that the core news itself was the same. We were more or less all dealing from the same set of inalienable facts and some sort of a shared reality.
Well, it's certainly not the case anymore.
Precious.
Let's move on to the guy who has perhaps been the single largest beneficiary of this inverted reality Fox created. You know who I'm going to say, and I hate to say it as much as you do, Donald Trump.
It's always him. So as we said, Murdoch and Trump go all the way back to the terminally disco late 1970s, and they ran in the same New York conservative high society dirtbag circles. By the early 80s, Trump was a fixture in the pages of Murdoch's New York Post, facilitated by his trusty lawyer Roy Cohen.
The Post and Donald Trump entered into a gross symbiotic relationship where his name and pictures got the papers to sell, and in turn they made him look like a glamorous playboy who fucks a lot. And he could use the tabloid as his own personal conduit for public statements, kind of like what Twitter was for him later, except with less falling asleep on the toilet mid-thought.
When you think about it, Trump's penchant for giving his rivals and enemies disparaging and pithy little nicknames like Sleepy Joe, Crazy Nancy, Lil Marco, Lion Ted Cruz is very New York Post.
Yeah, calling Florida Governor Ron DeSantis Meatball Ron is actually a perfect New York Post headline because it, 1, makes me laugh. 2, it only sort of makes sense. And 3, I'm kind of mad that it's as funny as it is. In any case, in the 2000s, Murdoch allowed for Trump to strike a similarly mutually beneficial relationship with an arm of his media empire. This time, it was Fox News.
Trump began appearing on what would later become his absolute favorite show, Fox and Friends, in 2011, where he immediately started pushing the theory that President Obama was not born in America and was actually born in Kenya.
Even veteran Fox News stooges like Glenn Beck and Bill O'Reilly had mocked birtherism as a conspiracy theory before that. But once Trump began saying it on air and Fox saw the rabid response it elicited from viewers, things at the network began to shift. Birtherism was good and probably correct now, actually.
While Murdoch may have known Trump was good for ratings, he didn't take him seriously as a possible politician, let alone presidential candidate. This put Murdoch at odds with Fox CEO Roger Ailes, who loved Trump out of the gate.
In the first GOP presidential primary debate on Fox News in 2015, Murdoch told moderator and Fox News host and early pick-me-girl pioneer Megyn Kelly to go hard after Trump, particularly about his comments disparaging women. This backfired because it turns out his followers actually love disparaging women. So instead of complaints about Trump, who characteristically apologized for nothing and went on the offensive in response to the question, the network received a flood of emails from viewers complaining about Kelly.
4 sources later told New Yorker reporter Jane Mayer that Roger Ailes had quietly given Trump the debate questions in advance.
Fox News reporter Diana Falzone uncovered the Stormy Daniels hush money story in the fall of 2016, but the network refused to run it. Former Fox executive Ken LaCorte reportedly told Falzone, "Good reporting, kiddo, but Rupert wants Donald Trump to win, so we'll just let it go." The story wouldn't break nationally for another 2 full years.
A man calling an adult woman kiddo is somehow not the most upsetting part of that anecdote.
Former FCC Chairman Reed Hundt put it like this. Murdoch didn't invent Trump, but he invented the audience. Murdoch was going to make a Trump exist. Then Trump comes along, sees all these people, and says, "I'll be the ringmaster in your circus."
Just like he did with Ronald Reagan, Rupert Murdoch put his personal feelings about the man's competence aside, namely that he was a spoiled moron, when he realized he was a spoiled moron winner who could advance his pet causes, becoming more powerful by helping losers feel like winners. According to multiple sources, Trump and Murdoch spoke almost every day during the first term, in part due to the new president's, inexperience?
According to Michael Wolff's 2018 book, Fire and Fury, Murdoch had, a few years prior, emerged from a conversation with Trump about immigration and immediately derided him as a fucking idiot. Relatable.
But you'd never know it from Fox News coverage of Trump, which was to portray him as a sort of Jesus meets Elvis meets Alexander the Great.
Fox, being Trump's personal megaphone, made it unsurprising that a pipeline almost immediately emerged between the network and his administration. Fox News contributors who found homes in the first Trump administration include Ben Carson, warmongering walrus John Bolton, Katie McFarland, and Heather Nauert, among many others.
As the administration wore on, we saw a reverse of that phenomenon, with disgraced Trump employees who had fallen out of the king's favor or simply failed beyond belief finding a landing place at Fox. Think Hope Hicks and Sebastian Gorka.
It's like if the human centipede were a circle. Seb Gorka, I'll never forget your extremely unsettling Hungarian voice that sounds like the guy from What We Do in the Shadows if he'd never met a woman before.
You really are the most devious bastard in New York City.
In July 2018, former co-president of Fox News, Bill Shine, was named director of communications and deputy chief of staff at the White House. Shine was so close to Sean Hannity that they reportedly vacationed together regularly. Ooh, romantic. Shine was also allegedly personally responsible for covering up some of Roger Ailes' sexual predation, but we'll get to that in a minute.
During those years, Murdoch got particularly chummy with Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, less of a fucking idiot in the traditional sense, and more in the daddy's boy, dead behind the eyes, in over his head sense.
According to Gabriel Sherman's book, when Roger Ailes was on his way out the door of Fox in 2016 for being a sexual harassment machine, he warned Murdoch, Trump gets great ratings, but if you're not careful, he's going to end up totally controlling Fox News. Does anyone know how that ended up working out?
Ah, yes. Fox and other of Murdoch's companies under the News Corp conglomerate have had quite a few whoopsie-daisies over the years, and Rupert often had to answer for them personally.
In 2002, a British teenager named Millie Dowler went missing, and the story became a national fixation across the UK. She was found dead 6 months later. Almost a decade thereafter, in July of 2011, The Guardian published an explosive story revealing that reporters at Murdoch's News of the World tabloid had directed a private investigator to hack Dowler's phone so they could publish some of her voicemails. Hacking a murdered 13-year-old's phone is unimaginably heinous, even for a British tabloid. And also illegal.
Not only did the folks at News of the World publish those voicemails, they also deleted a bunch of her voicemails to make room for more in the days immediately following her disappearance, a practice which initially led members of her family to believe that she was still alive, not to mention interfering with the ongoing police investigation.
But wait, there's more. Thanks to this expose, we found out that phone hacking was a regular practice at News of the World. They allegedly hacked the phones of families of soldiers killed in Afghanistan, victims of the 2005 London bombing, the grieving mother of an 8-year-old girl who was abducted and murdered in 2000, professional sports executives, and members of parliament. That is a nice variety.
At least 15 News of the World employees were charged with hacking crimes, and the company paid millions of dollars in settlements, ultimately forcing the tabloid to shut down once and for all after 168 years in print. Rupert showed up in London and went on a sort of non-apology tour.
People were simply not happy with the guy at that moment in 2011. And you'll never believe this, but when he told the Wall Street Journal that he was getting annoyed with all the negative publicity, that didn't help either.
Rupert and his son James, then a top executive in the UK wing of the Murdoch Empire, were forced to testify before a parliamentary inquiry committee about the hacking scandal in July of that year. During the inquiry, James did his best to stick to the script. Then his dad swiftly threw him under the bus and denied knowing anything about the hacking.
Okay, so Alyssa, here's where it gets really Succession-y. According to reporting at The Atlantic by McKay Coppins, the idea to offer up James as a sacrifice came from James's sister, Elizabeth, a successful development exec who nevertheless would never be considered to take over Rupert's empire because Rupert is, in the words of his son James, quote, a misogynist. Well, it's a mouthful. So Elizabeth goes to her dad and is like, hey, Rupert, hey, Daddy K, I think we should fire James. The public is mad and we need to give them a Murdoch.
Literally a plotline in Succession.
Yes, blood sacrifice. So throwing James to the wolves was Elizabeth's idea, and Rupert was like, cool, love it, sweetie. Now go tell your brother. And when Elizabeth was like, Dad says you're fired, James was like, fuck you, Elizabeth. Dad can fire me himself. And the two had a rift between them that lasted years as a result. Now, this is far from the first time that Rupert Murdoch pitted his own children against each other in a way that seems fucking evil.
I'm just glad the article didn't come out until after Succession was over, spoilers and all.
Yeah.
Now, I don't want us to skip over that the 2011 parliamentary inquiry also resulted in the iconic moment of a protester attempting to hit Rupert in the face with a pie, only to have his third wife, Wendy Dang, leap to his aid.
Wendy with the reflexes. Look at that.
Absolute chaos.
That is a painting.
It is a painting. Unfortunately, the guy who threw the pie was sentenced to 6 weeks in jail. Jail! Man, you would think he did something really terrible like hack a murder victim's phone and interfere with a police investigation. The News of the World phone hacking scandal was one of the biggest in the Murdoch files, but Fox News wouldn't be outdone. As we mentioned in 2016, CEO Roger Ailes was outed as Fox's resident pervert. Numerous female employees at Fox alleged that Ailes had demanded oral sex from them and promised career advancement in exchange for sex, among many other instances of gross and illegal behavior.
So, Alyssa, I'm sure you read this when it came out, but I will be forever haunted by the detail in the Gabe Sherman New York Magazine piece about the accusations. One Fox News makeup artist remembered having to redo some of the female talent's makeup after leaving Ailes' office because the makeup on her nose and chin was gone somehow.
Ailes resigned in disgrace, and instead of immediately hiring a new CEO to clean up the mess, Rupert appointed himself as interim CEO. After this decision, Fox went even further off the rails than usual. Tucker Carlson started doing great replacement conspiracy theory monologues. Other hosts spouted off about how unfair it was that their daddy Roger had been accused of terrible things he almost certainly did. Fellow conservative creep Bill O'Reilly paid out $32 million in a sexual harassment lawsuit the following year, which insanely did not deter Murdoch from renewing O'Reilly's contract shortly thereafter.
One of the promises of a Murdochian future is that powerful men are allowed to do whatever they want to whomever they want, whenever they want. O'Reilly, Ailes, and others made it clear that Fox was an incubator of sexual predation, cover-ups, payoffs, and victim intimidation. Which sucks because if it wasn't for that, everyone who works there seems like such a fun hang. Looking at you, Defense Secretary. So much bronzer. So many unmedicated personality disorders. Imagine how the scalps must burn with platinum blonde patriotism.
But we saved the biggest, costliest Fox News fuck-up for last. When Donald Trump lost the 2020 election, he famously refused to concede, a move immediately and unequivocally supported by all of the hosts in the Fox News extended universe. They began parroting a completely bunk theory asserting that Dominion Voting Systems, a voting machine company, was involved in a plot to steal the election from Trump.
Unfortunately for all of the jackals at Fox, you can't just continually broadcast baseless accusations to tens of millions of viewers about a person or company because your candidate lost, especially when you know those accusations are baseless.
Dominion brought a libel lawsuit against Fox, and over the course of a 6-week trial, their attorneys met the high legal threshold for actual malice by pointing to internal emails and correspondence proving that Fox executives, producers, and employees knew that the voter fraud claims were false. That is what we call in the biz a no-no.
One of the emails came from Murdoch himself, who said Trump's insistence that he had won was pretty much a crime. Whoops. He's not wrong. In the end, Fox was forced to pay Dominion a staggering $787 million, one of the largest settlements in history. God, this is a slam dunk that takes off from the three-point line, and there's like a backflip on the way to the hoop. In his sworn deposition, Murdoch said he never believed any of the claims of computer fraud. The leaked internal communications also showed Murdoch's personal abhorrence of Trump. After the January 6th insurrection at the U.S. Capitol, he wrote in an email that he aimed to make Trump a non-person. Again, does anyone know how that turned out? Was he successful? Did he succeed?
However much or little Murdoch allegedly hates Trump, all of his media outlets are some degree of pro-Trump. The editorial board at the Murdoch-owned Wall Street Journal might massage their language with more finesse than the goons at Fox and voice objections to Trump's rhetoric or question his intellection, but they clearly want him to succeed all the same.
In the aftermath of the Dominion libel settlement, Rupert finally decided to step down as chairman of Fox and News Corp in September 2023 at the spry age of 92, though he still exerts significant influence over both as majority shareholder to this day.
As we've alluded to, there's been a question over the years as to whether Rupert Murdoch's conservative news empire stems from his personal political views or if he's just a devout free marketeer following the money to the darkest corners of humanity.
For what it's worth, it is clearly ideological for him. This is, after all, the guy who in 1995 told The New Yorker, "The truth is, and we Americans don't like to admit it, that authoritarian societies can work." Okay, see, now there's the Lenin bust. Yeah, the Vladimir. Okay, I get it. In a 2023 letter to his ex-wife, Murdoch said, "Fox and our papers are the only fairly conservative voices against the monolithic liberal media. I believe maintaining this is vital to the future of the English-speaking world." You gotta disagree with you there, my guy.
It's also pretty clear when you consider that in 2023, Rupert and Lachlan Murdoch, in an extremely "I am the eldest boy" maneuver, engaged in a scheme to amend the irrevocable family trust to give Lachlan sole voting power over his father's companies on the board of trustees at the time of Rupert's death, stripping those rights from Rupert's 3 other adult children. Lachlan is by far the most politically conservative of the 4 adult Murdoch kids and was named Rupert's successor after he stepped down from Fox and News Corp.
So in order to follow the ongoing Murdoch family court drama in Nevada, we need to understand a little about Rupert's wrinkly, drama-filled personal life. Murdoch is currently on his 5th wife, one left to go until he's tied with Henry VIII. His first wife is the mother of his oldest daughter. His second wife is the mother of the 3 little Murdochs we're most familiar with, Lachlan, Elizabeth, and James. He met his third wife, Wendy Deng, when he was still married to his second wife, and informed the child of his first wife of their meeting by describing her as a, quote, "nice Chinese woman." Rupert married Wendy 3 weeks after the divorce from his second wife was finalized. Wendy and Rupert have 2 daughters who are currently college students and stand to inherit some of Rupert's money, but aren't involved in the Nevada mudslinging. Wendy and Rupert divorced acrimoniously in 2013. In 2014, it was revealed that Deng was possibly having an affair with former British Prime Minister Tony Blair, whom at one point Rupert had backed. Years later, reports surfaced that Wendy Deng was trying to get close to Jared and Ivanka Trump because she was a Chinese spy, but some journalists, including Michael Wolff, speculated that this was a rumor started by Rupert because he was still mad at Wendy for possibly boffing Tony.
Another anecdote from the life of Rupert Murdoch that makes more sense if you remember his real name is Keith.
That's a real Keith story for sure. So a few years after that, Keith and former model Mick Jagger's ex, Jerry Hall, got married, which means that Rupert Murdoch and Mick Jagger have eaten off the same plate, I guess. I don't know. You know the slang. Imagine being Mick Jagger and being like, I wonder what my ex is up to. And you click over to their Instagram page and she's like hard launching Rupert Murdoch. Ugh. You won the breakup, Mick. Alas, Rupert and Jerry were not meant to be because a few years later, he let her know that he was divorcing her via email. Here's what the 11-word breakup note said, according to a report from Vanity Fair. "Jerry, sadly, I've decided to call an end to our marriage. We have certainly had some good times, but I have much to do. My New York lawyer will be contacting yours immediately." Seriously, that's the email. But if you were hoping that this breakup with Jerry Hall meant the end of the public being subjected to headlines implying that Rupert Murdoch's turkey waddle of a face has been pressed wetly and amorously against another human being's face, sorry to let you down. Murdoch's boyish heart has only accelerated in its quest to find true and lasting love. On St. Patrick's Day 2023, Murdoch proposed to his then-girlfriend, Anne Leslie Smith, only to announce 2 weeks later that the engagement was called off because, and I'm not making this up, Alyssa, I swear to God, it turns out she was crazy.
Erin, crazy how?
Okay, well, according to a few news sources, she was enraptured with Fox News host Tucker Carlson, whom she called a messenger from God. That's how crazy. Interestingly, 3 weeks later, Carlson, who at the time was the network's biggest ratings draw, was fired from Fox News. I fucking love this story so much that I want to propose to it on St. Patrick's Day. Rupert rebounded with a retired Russian microbiologist named Elena Zhukova.
Play banjo music over that story. It sounds like a chapter from J.D. Vance's Hillbilly Elegy.
Sure does.
Anyway, the Murdoch family trust litigation unfolded, as all great dramas do, in Reno, Nevada probate court. Over 3,000 trial documents were made public and painted the picture of Rupert as a power-obsessed patriarch slipping into senility and paranoia. Rupert's more liberal son, James, had been at News Corp and Fox for over 20 years, putting his own politics aside out of loyalty to his father. For that loyalty, Rupert knifed James in the back repeatedly throughout his professional career. Okay, I get it. James is the Roman Roy.
One of Daddy Rupert's big rules was you never talk to the press about the family. But in the discovery phase of the trust litigation, it was uncovered that Rupert and his cronies personally planted numerous defamatory stories about his own son, James, and James's wife, Catherine. We don't have the money to get the rights to the Succession theme song, but here's one of our writers singing it. Was that good?
In a 1989 interview with Forbes, Murdoch said, "I can think of more important things than being loved by everybody." Well, Rupert, mission accomplished.
You know, that quote also works if you strike everybody and insert anybody. Rupert's fortune was built for no purpose other than to hoard wealth and power. He got there by lying, cheating, and screwing people over. By throwing his own family members under the bus for what seems like his own amusement. And the media he controls has done damage to the societies where it operates in ways that will take decades to repair, if they're not already irreparable. He's turned people who've been shorted by the system into xenophobic, fox-pilled zealots, too busy hating immigrants and trans athletes to understand that billionaires like him are the real enemy. He's given hate a spray tan and a teleprompter. And for what? $22.3 billion in a world teetering on the brink of utter chaos. Meanwhile, he stands poised to exit this mortal coil just as we are about to collectively reap what he has sown. So, Alyssa, on a scale of 1 to 5 weasels, where does Rupert fall?
Erin, he's a solid 5 weasels. If there were 6 weasels, I'd give him 6 weasels. Because in his quest to get rich, he's inflicted the pain on all of us.
I could see that. My answer might surprise you. I'm going to give him 3 weasels, and here's why. He behaved just as almost every other billionaire has behaved. He just behaved that way in an industry that has bigger social consequences. But, like, find me a billionaire that, like, earned their billions, that became a billionaire on their own, and, like, find me one that didn't behave that way. Because I think they all did. Between Murdoch and Elon Musk, I gotta say, maybe Rupert Murdoch's publications have a point. Like, maybe immigrants are ruining America, just not the ones that they're blaming. Okay. Time for us to sign off. If you like what you just saw, please like and subscribe and share with anybody you think might get a kick out of this. I also want to thank you, viewers, for this topic. You voted. You picked Rupert.
We loved it.
We loved it. Thank you so much.
And if you have any ideas for future This Fucking Guy subjects, leave them in the comments, and see you next time.
Or nor. Rupert or nor.